Good morning. This is Attorney Vince Davis, and these are the morning office hours for CPS questions. And this morning we're going to be talking about, should I go to that team decision meeting? Should I go to that CFT meeting? The answer is surprising. Generally, when a case starts, or even during the case, the social worker will call you up and say, hey, I want to have a meeting with you. And the answer is surprising. Generally, when a case starts, or even during the case, the social worker will call you up and say, hey, I want to have a meeting with you, and maybe the mother and the father, and, come on down to our office. And you get down there and you go into a meeting, there's about 4 or 5 social workers there ready to grill you on questions. Now, there's something that you have to accept and have to not acknowledge. Social workers are highly trained government agents. They're just not some lady or guy off the street. Their job is to prove a case against you. Now, what is the best way that they can prove a case against you when they weren't there witnessing the incident of alleged abuse? Well, it comes from your own mouth. See, a lot of people think they can out-talk, outsmart, outthink a social worker. You can't do that. These people are professionals at what they do, and they're professionals at taking kids from families. So, it's all behind the mask of, we're going to do what's best for the child. We're going to do, what protects the child. In my opinion, in most cases, not all, that's BS. Let me tell you a story. I represented a mom in court, and she had gotten back her oldest child, which was a male, a boy. I think he was about 16 years old. But she had a daughter that was about 14 years old, and that daughter still was in foster care. And she was having a lot of problems. Well, the judge ordered that the department place the child in an appropriate setting. So it ended up she was placed in a group home. Now, problem. The kid is Caucasian, is white. The group home she's placed in, mostly African Americans. Now, there were reports about the kid being beaten up, the kid, her stuff being stolen or destroyed. Her, at that time it was a Walkman, her clothes being taken and worn by other people without her permission. So we came to court, and this was reported to the judge. And the judge wanted to have a conference with all the attorneys. So we trot back to the judge's chambers, and the judge says to all of us, you know, and the judge at this time was fairly new to juvenile dependency. And the judge says something to the effect, I read today's report, and maybe I should be investigating all of these places that we send our children to, because obviously, the placement she's in isn't working. It's actually more detrimental to her than placing her back with her mother. Do you think the court sent the child home that day? No. They did move the child. Eventually, we got the child home. And the mother told me of what I will call, for lack of a better word, atrocities. Atrocities that this child experienced in a group home of teenagers. Your typical group home is 6 to 8 beds, and there may be 1 or 2 staff there at any point in time. it's difficult for one or two people to control teenagers, right? I raise teenagers. It's a difficult thing to be watching them all the time, making sure they're not, you know, I was going to say they're not using drugs, they're not um, failing school, they're doing their homework, they're doing their activities. That's a hard thing to do. So, getting back to what we originally were talking about, meeting with the social worker. My advice to you, and I'm licensed here in California, but it's probably the same, in other states, but you need to talk to your attorney. The problem is that when you speak to a social worker, you give the social worker evidence to use against you. I many, many, many years ago, I represented a guy who was accused of robbing a bank. And when I first met him in custody, he said, "Hey, Mr. Davis, you'd be proud of me. I didn't speak to the FBI agents or the police." Now, this guy, he was like 18 or 19. He knew that he should not be talking to the police, and he didn't do it. He knew that because of, things he heard on the street. He knew that because he saw movies, he saw televisions. You got to lawyer up. I'm sorry. You got to lawyer up. It's American. It's a way to protect your rights, even if you are innocent. Okay? So, same thing with social workers. Don't go talking to social workers on the phone in person. You're not going to make friends, even though you think you are. You're not going to convince the social worker, even though you think you're smarter than the social worker. And you're not going to get her to drop the case. If they got their hooks in you, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go for everything that they can get while being your friend. And by the way, social workers are trained to establish a relationship with you so that you will trust them, so that you will give them information that they can use against you in court. So don't talk to the social workers without your attorney being present. Now, I didn't say don't talk to the social workers, period. I said don't talk to the social workers without your attorney being present. She or he can be present in person. He or she can be present on the phone, right? And you can communicate with each other via text and via uh, a second phone during the interview. But let the social worker know, your attorney is there. I'm doing a TDM or CFT meeting with my client, and I think about 2 or 3 social workers coming up on Monday. I'm in Los Angeles, and it's taking place in Butte County, which is in Northern California. But I'm going to be on the phone, and I'm going to be communicating, client, and I will be there to help control any damage. If my client goes in by herself, they might get her to admit that she killed John F. Kennedy. You know, Social workers are very good at what they do. Acknowledge it, people. They're very good at what they do. Don't try to outsmart them or outthink them or outstrategize them. It probably isn't going to work. Now, if you don't talk to the social worker, is that a negative? Yes. Although I have seen nothing in the law here in California that says the parent must talk to the social worker, a lot of times the social worker will do this number. Well, if you don't talk to me, I'm going to tell the judge. And in some cases, the judge will say, so, the client didn't, or the parent didn't talk to you. So what? But then in some cases, the judge will say, oh, you didn't talk to the social worker. And in the back of their mind, they might use that against you. So I put it like this to people. If you talk to the social worker on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being worse, it's definitely a 10. All right? If you don't talk to the social worker, it's a 5. It's not a 0, it's a 5. Now, what do you want? Do you want a 5 or do you want a 10? My money says take the 5 and move on. Now, I recently had a social worker interview, and it's COVID pandemic time right now. And my client and I were on the phone together with the social worker and her attorney, and they're asking my guy questions. Now, I'm doing this because I think it's in his best interest to have a conversation with the social worker and the social worker's attorney. They ask a lot of questions, just general social questions. But when they got to the real question at hand, you know, Mr. So and so, did you do this? I'm sorry, Mr. So and so is not going to answer that question. And because I've worked with this county council before, we didn't get into this back and forth argument about, why he should or should not answer this question. And I simply said in a very nice, courteous manner, professional, let's move on to the next question, please. So the question was, Mr. So-and-so, did you kill Martin Luther King? Uh, I'm sorry, he's not going to answer that question. Let's move to the next question. Mr. So-and-so, were you in Memphis, Tennessee on such and such a date in 1963? I'm sorry, we're not going to answer that question. Let's move to the next one. Okay, and it went for a series of questions like that. Then it was, okay, Mr. So-and-so, did you graduate from college? Well, you can answer that question because that can't necessarily be used or twisted against you in the case with respect to them trying to take away your child. So you get the picture? So meeting with the social worker is not bad per se. In my opinion, it could be bad if you try to do it by yourself. And it could be okay if you have an experienced attorney there with you, monitoring and keeping your client from answering certain questions. Now, there's something that I want to tell you guys, and a lot of people don't think of this, and a lot of people don't know this. But when you talk to a social worker, and let's say that there's child abuse involved of a serious nature, anything you tell the social worker can be used against you across the street at the criminal courthouse. Yeah. You could not only incriminate yourself in losing your kids, you can incriminate yourself right into jail. So be careful when you talk to social workers. Social workers can be and often are witnesses in criminal child abuse proceedings. Now, the last thing I want to tell you is this. I've been an attorney over 31 years. I think I've been doing this maybe 28 or 29 years. And I'm here to tell you that there are some really good social workers. There are some really bad social workers. And then the majority, like a bell curve, are like right in the middle. They're average. And what I am always concerned about is that when you talk to a social worker, your words may be twisted. Your words, the social worker might